Thank you, Acting President. I rise to speak on the Voluntary Assisted Dying Amendment Bill 2025. Straight up, I'm a supporter of Victoria's voluntary assisted dying laws. I support Victorians' right to choose how they end their own life, and I think there could be no more powerful or profound right that we give our fellow citizens to choose the timing and the manner of their death. And as legislators, these are issues that clearly affect us all very deeply. For me, I've got to say it's a pretty straightforward question. Do the amendments in this bill improve on the current law? And I think the answer clearly is yes. Listening to the debate today, the passion in those opposed to the bill seems to me a passion that is really in opposition to the Principal Act. Defeating this bill won't stop Victorians being able to access voluntary assisted dying. It's the law of the land, and after 6 years of operation, that law is working well. As that Principal Act remains the law of the state, I'm really thankful to our predecessors in the 58th Parliament who stood and debated until to make it so. And I particularly want to pay tribute to Jill Hennessy, who was Health Minister at the time, who drove the reform, and to Gavin Jennings, who led the government in this place and took this bill through the marathon sittings in this chamber, and to everyone who contributed to the passage of the Voluntary Assisted Dying Act. And we're not replicating that effort in this bill today. This is incremental by comparison. It's important, yes, and it's an improvement, absolutely. But I thought it was important to put that in some context. I also at the start want to pay particular tribute to the amazing advocacy of our colleague Emma Vaughan, the member for Pakenham, on the issues in this legislation. And what Emma's done in 3 years in this place puts us all to shame, I think. Her impact is extraordinary, almost as extraordinary as her warmth and the generosity of her spirit, for sharing with us all her personal journey with MND and for speaking so bravely about why this bill means so much to her. And we're with you, Emma. I just want to structure the rest of my speech with a little bit of sort of some echoes or some reflections of some comments I made in my inaugural speech. That'll hopefully give a bit of context and shed some light on what's motivating my support for the bill. First thing I'll say is I said then that, and I reflected then, that the task of policy reform is never done. There are always new challenges for us to confront, and we can't rest on our laurels or be zealously uncritical of the work that we've already done. And I think this bill typifies that spirit, where we've passed a significant piece of legislation, we've looked at its operations and decided it could be improved. And it has worked well for 1,600 Victorians who've accessed the VAD pathway, but for many it hasn't. And the bill makes some important improvements to the operation of the state's voluntary assisted dying framework. And I won't go through them all, but removing the gag clause, amending citizenship and residency requirements, removing the third prognosis requirement for people with neurodegenerative conditions, amendments to medical practitioner eligibility requirements and the prognosis requirements, and more. In reflecting and listening to the debate early on and some of the views, there's been some particular concern about the operation of Clause 6 and the provision of amendments, the provision of information, setting out what those who conscientiously object to voluntary assisted dying must provide patients. The explanatory memorandum in the second reading speech seeks to clarify what that minimum information means. It's been clear in the course of the debate that members would like more certainty in the law itself about what that should be, and I've proposed an amendment to provide some certainty about that and ask that those amendments be circulated.
Thank you. I'll just ask that the amendments be circulated now. Mr.
Thank you. And very briefly, those amendments are some pretty simple amendments clarifying and prescribing the information that can be provided by a conscientious objector to a patient, rather than leaving at the discretion of the Secretary to provide. So I do that in consideration of the committee stage. Second sort of reflection or echo I want to make of my inaugural was just some reflections on the work of the late Dorothy Reading, my father's partner of about 35 years, my brother's mother, and a woman who I previously described as a force of nature in politics, policy and public health advocacy. And upon her retirement from the Cancer Council, where she saved countless lives, she's a retirement from paid work. She then, in the early 2010s, she joined the board of Dying with Dignity in Victoria because she felt that the laws and the framework that governed end-of-life care in Victoria needed reform. And as she said, when she was faced with the choice between expressing sentiment and taking action, Dorothy would always insist on the latter, always insist on taking action. And so I know that over that period of time, we spent many hours over a bowl of soup at the lunch table discussing with her the work she was doing. We debated ambition and bottom lines and compromise and persuasion and many aspects of this work. And she got to work for Dying with Dignity, strategising, devising, cajoling, campaigning, focused, determined, and in 2017, successful. Dorothy died unexpectedly in 2019, just days before the laws she had worked so hard to see come into effect. And so I'm here to do what I can to keep progressing this issue, lending my support, proud to support Dying with Dignity, the work they do. I've spent many hours talking with Jane and Michelle from Dying with Dignity about these issues, and will continue to be a supporter for as long as I have the absolute privilege of being in this place. I think the last reflection on my inaugural involves just a short discussion about my mum, Alice. Mum couldn't be here at my inaugural. I said at the time she was watching from home because her body just wasn't well enough to make the trip into Parliament. That was in February of 2023. And what we didn't know then, but we found out in April, just 2 months later, was that she had cancer. One day she had a stomachache, and that led to the discovery of a bowel obstruction. And that obstruction was caused by tumours, really, and a cancer that had spread through her bowel and her liver, by which stage about half was covered in tumours. It had metastasised through her lungs and elsewhere, and there was no treatment. There was nothing that could be done. And it was clear then that for this little 5'0" fighter, who was about 40 odd kilos at that point, she was going to die, and soon, within months. And her doctor said maybe 6 months she'd have, and she was just hoping to make it to her birthday in late August. And we sat there and she processed the news in the hospital, we processed this news. How you go from one day having an upset stomach to a couple of days later being told you're going to be dead within months, and there's nothing anyone can do. And sitting in the office, the doctor's office, with her oncologist, she was sitting there being absolutely determined. I was sitting there being a quivering wreck. She had the courage and assuredness of mind to ask her oncologist about voluntary assisted dying, because she supported it and felt that the laws had been passed to be an option for someone like her. He said to her that he couldn't help and that he wouldn't help, that he didn't believe in it and he didn't know anyone who could. And we're a bit shocked, to be honest, by that response. And it was pretty confronting. We bundled up, went home, and got on with the task of making her life more comfortable. The weeks that followed were obviously a haze. We were getting her set up at home, a new bed, a new chair, wheelchair, shower modifications, food, love, support, everything she might need. I just want to take a moment to thank her partner, Greg, for the work that he did for her and for us in that time. After a few weeks of being at home, her gradual but noticeable deterioration was clear, and my mind returned to her request for information about VAD. Her oncologist wasn't going to help, but I thought that as a reasonably competent human being, I could probably figure this one out. There were tough nuts to crack, but I thought I was up for the challenge. So I read everything that I could. I spoke to a lot of people, and then I took a look at the discharge letter from her oncologist, and it said that, in his opinion, she had between 6 and 12 months to live, which confused me and perplexed me because it's not what he told her in the room before she asked him about VAD. And I made more calls, and the oncologist referred me to a second doctor who told me point blank that he needed to concur with her consulting oncologist's report and with the assessment that she had between 6 and 12 months to live. And I really struggled to comprehend how medical professionals could say this when it was very clear to us that she was going to die very soon. And I had that conversation on a sitting day on the lawn out the back, and I was pacing around trying to figure out what we could do, how we could overcome this issue. And I was just shocked, and I didn't know what to do. I felt like a failure. Failure as a navigator of rules and requirements and checking all of these boxes that have been put in place. Failure as someone who was confident that they could conquer bureaucracy. And honestly, I felt like I was a failure as a son. I felt powerless to help. And if I felt that I was probably more skilled than most to try and solve this problem, how did other people in the community who didn't have access to what I have access to feel like? And no one with a dying loved one should feel like that. No one should feel like their dying mother's simple requests were being obstructed by rules that made no sense. In the end, I don't know whether Mum would have used VAD. I just don't know. I got the sense that by that point she was at peace with what was happening to her, and she knew that she was dying pretty quickly. I should also say that Victoria's medicinal cannabis reforms did give her some much needed relief from the persistent discomfort, and they were a godsend. And I thank those who advocated for that. She died less than 4 months after her diagnosis. She was at home, at peace, in her own bed. But if the law had reflected the amendments that this bill proposes, we would have had a very different set of circumstances and a lot less anguish and a lot less at the mercy of an oncologist who said one thing to her face and then wrote another thing in a letter after she'd expressed her views about an option she wanted to consider about how her life would end. So, Acting President, if this bill provides more certainty, more clarity, more support for those who are also going through the challenges of dealing with someone who expectedly or unexpectedly is told that they're going to die soon and that they have the power to make decisions about their own life and how it should end, I absolutely commend this bill to the House.